Okay, good evening, everybody. Tonight's class is dedicated by my wife and I. Tonight and tomorrow is my father-in-law's yard site. Rabbi Yisroel Yitzchak Yaakov Minkowitz is a very, very Chassidish Yid. So the yard site is tonight and tomorrow, Yud Zayin Iyud. So tonight's class is dedicated in his memory. Last week we started with the dinim of what's called pas palter, pas akum, which means like this. The Chachamim forbade certain things that have to do with non-Jews because the Chachamim, the Torah did not, the Rabbanan didn't want there should be assimilation between Jews and non-Jews. And therefore, they made certain prohibitions because certain things bring people closer together. One of them is wine, not even if it was poured for idol worshiping. Just an open bottle of wine that's not cooked, that a non-Jew touches, a Jew is not allowed to drink the wine because, again, wine brings people closer together. The same thing it says, there's something called pas akum and bishul akum. Pas akum means bread that was baked by a non-Jew, by a private individual non-Jew, is rabbinically forbidden to eat, even if all the ingredients are kosher. It's forbidden to eat it. There's also a concept that we'll soon learn. First, we're going to do pas akum, and then there's something called bishul akum. Certain things a guy is not allowed to cook, because if a guy cooks it, rabbinically it's forbidden to eat. And we'll get into the many, many details of this. Last time we just began these dinim, so we mentioned there's something called pas palter. Pas palter, again, the reason why the Chachamim said you can't have a non-Jew bake bread for you or certain cakes for you because it brings people closer together. You know, the non-Jew will bake a bread for you, you'll get friendly with him, then you'll bake for him, and we'll go back and forth. But there's a din that's called pas palter. Pas palter is bread that was baked by a baker for the masses. He's not baking a bread for any individual person. He's baking the bread for a baker. He's a baker. So he's baking for whoever buys the bread. He has, it doesn't cause the same closeness. So pas palter, halachically, is more lenient than pas akum itself, than stam bread that was baked by a non-Jew, because that you're not allowed to eat if the guy baked it from beginning to end. Now, pas akum, and therefore pas palter, only applies to cakes and bread that were baked with the 5 grains, which means wheat, barley, oats, rye, and spelt. Okay, those are the 5 grains: wheat, barley, oats, rye, and spelt. But if somebody makes, let's say, cakes out of potato starch or bean flour or quinoa flour, whatever, any of those types of things, the din of pas akum doesn't apply. Obviously, you have to make sure the ingredients are kosher. But it's important that people should be aware that all the major kashrus organizations, such as OU, OK, Chafk, and most of, I'm not talking about the Hamish Hasidish Hechshedim, but the regular nationwide organizations of kashrus do give a hechsher and pas palter. That means you can go to a store and you can buy cookies that have an OU. So obviously it's kosher, but that does not mean it's not pas palter. They are makel to give a hechsher and pas palter. And they're allowed to give a hechsher and pas palter. In our circles, especially in the Hasidic community, we're more strict about not eating pas palter. Now, there is a heter for pas palter. It says in Shulchan Aruch, even though we're strict on it even then, and Shulchan Aruch says if you can't get pas Yisroel bread, if you can't get bread that's baked by a Jew, or bread that's not as good as bread baked by this palter, in other words, you can get pas Yisroel bread, but it's not as good as the pas palter bread. So then in Shulchan Aruch it says you could be lenient. But like I mentioned, in our circles, we're not lenient in that, and we're very strict in things being pas Yisrael. Now, so again, just because you see OU, OK, Chofke, or any of the other kashrus organizations, does not necessarily mean it's pas Yisrael. In fact, it's not pas Yisrael unless if it would clearly say on it pas Yisrael. Now, what defines pas Yisrael? So the din is, even if a Jew, don't forget, years ago they didn't have like stoves like we have today. They would have like the matzah bakery stoves. So the din is, even if a Jew added a little bit to the fire, I mean, let's say a guy turned on the fire for the bacon, for the oven, and a Jew threw in one piece of wood, that's already makes it not pas hakum. It already makes it pas Yisrael. And in fact, it's interesting for informational purposes. Many companies, how do they, when they make pas Yisrael, how do they make sure it's pas Yisrael? So they have what's called a heating globe. It's not a bulb. Some people want to be making with a bulb. We're not at all making with that. But there's a certain heating element that stays inside the oven that keeps the oven hot. Because you have to spend just financially, let's say they need, for argument's sake, 300 degrees to bake. If they close the oven overnight and then they need to heat it up in the morning, it's going to take a lot of fuel to get it back to 300. So a lot of times what they do is they'll keep it like overnight at 150. And then in the morning, it's cheaper for them to make it from 150 to 300, even though it's burning 150 a whole night, than starting the oven from fresh. So many places they have what's called a heating globe that actually is like 100, 150 degrees. And the Jew turns on that fire. And if the Jew turns on that fire, therefore it makes the oven hot. So he's adding to the flame. So even though the rest of the oven is turned on, let's say by the non-Jew, it's still good and it's still kosher, it's still considered pas Yisrael. Okay? Now, some people, what happens, and again, I'm just mentioning different halachos, and if somebody's in that particular situation, they should really ask a Rav Shaila. What happens if a non-Jew baked bread? Okay? And then a Jew toasted it afterwards, or roasted it afterwards, but even toasted it afterwards. There are certain opinions that say that's okay. I'm not saying you should rely on, not relying on, in some circumstances, a person doesn't have any pas Yisrael. So in certain opinions say that if you toast it after it's baked, so let's say you have an OU bread that's pas palter, but it's not pas Yisrael. And then you toast it, so there are opinions that say that makes it pas Yisrael. Or some people say if you bake it again, or if it's roasted and you bake it after it's roasted, some people say that that's fine. Some people say it's not fine. So there's a machlekes about that in halacha, if that's considered pas Yisrael or not. The same thing, by the way, with the stoves. Today we don't have pilot lights. But according to most opinions, when you have stoves with a pilot light, if a Jew turns on the pilot light, okay, and then a non-Jew turns on the fire, that's also called Bishul Yisroel, because the initial fire was made by a Jew, the pilot was put on by the Jew, and then when you just turn it on, and it takes the fire from the pilot into the round stove area, that would also be called Bishul Yisroel. And that most people did rely on it. Now, it's a very interesting argument between Sephardic and Ashkenazic, and it's interesting, Sephardic people are stricter in this respect than Ashkenazic people are. What happens if a Jew comes, turns on the oven? Okay, comes in the morning, turns on the oven, and then a non-Jew comes and puts in the bread or the cake to bake. So in Ashkenazic circles, it's called pas Yisrael. That's what the Ramah holds. It's called pas Yisrael because the Jew turned on the fire. That's what matters. Who puts the stuff into the oven really doesn't matter, as long as the Jew turned on the fire. The Sephardic community holds turning on the fire is not enough. You need a Jew to also put it inside the oven. It's not enough for a Jew to turn on the fire on the stove. You need a Jew to actually put the pot on top of the fire. So they're much stricter than the Ashkenazi, than we are in the Ashkenazi community, because we hold as soon as the Jew turns on the fire, then it's already called Bishul Yisroel. It's called Pas Yisroel, and there's no problem with it as far as a Jew cooking it, as far as kosher of it. Obviously, as long as the things are kosher. Another interesting thing. Okay, that's basically about Pas Yisroel. Again, so we're machmir generally in our circles to eat only Pas Yisroel, and we are not lenient in what's called Pas Palta, that a Goyish baker or company makes it. We're not makel that to eat it. We're machmir to have Pas Yisroel. Now, the next thing over here is, which is similar to Pas Palta and Pas Akum, is Bishul Yisroel. Bishul Yisroel means there are certain things that a Jew must cook. If a non-Jew cooks it from beginning to end, the Jew is not rabbinically not allowed to eat it. Now, what is the criteria for making something that must be baked by a Jew?
Baked or
cooked? Cooked by a Jew. What is the criteria? That's like as follows. Number one, it has to be something that cannot be eaten raw. Anything that you can eat raw, if a guy cooks it, there's no problem with it. For instance, you can eat an apple raw. If a guy makes a baked apple, you're allowed to eat the apple. It's not called goyish cooking, because it's something that you can eat raw. Something that could be eaten raw is not bishul akum. Second criteria, and this is a more little bit complicated category, and that is it has to be eila al shulchan malachim. Literally means it has to be fit for the table of a king. A food that's not fit for a table of a king, there is no problem with bishul akum. There is no problem if a guy cooks it. Now let's discuss certain examples of this, and we'll understand it. Okay, right now people don't eat raw meat. So if a guy cooks or bakes or fries or broils the meat from beginning to end, the Jew is not allowed to eat it. Not only is the Jew not allowed to eat it, according to many, many opinions, you have to kosher the utensils, rabbinically. Chachamim said, if a guy cooks something that cannot be eaten raw and is fit for the table of a king, there is a din of bishul akum. And not only is the food forbidden, the halacha is the utensils are also forbidden. And again, if a Jew does anything in the cooking process, it's not a problem, because then it wasn't cooked entirely by the non-Jew. So for instance, in Shulchan Aruch it says, if a guy cooks an egg, most people don't eat raw eggs. The din is if a guy cooks an egg for you, you're not allowed to eat it. Not only that, if he makes a fried egg for you, and he turns on the fire and does everything from A to Z, not only are you not allowed to eat the egg, but you have to, according to many opinions, you have to kosher the utensils that you cooked it in. So people that have housekeepers, I'm just mentioning this, it's going to be a shaka for many people, but people that have housekeepers, you can't have them cooking for you. Unless if you turn on the fire, and there are other dinim involved, basish and salam and ayin that we'll learn about, and you have to trust their kashrus. But I'm saying for a guy to turn on the fire and cook dinner and make a steak or make a fish or to make all these things that are fit for the table of a king, you're not allowed to eat the food, and you have to sometimes kasher the kalim. So
Rabbi Shusterman, I have a question.
yeah.
Can the housekeeper cook their own? I mean, in the oven, in their little in a small oven, their lunch.
If a guy cooks in your utensils, even though they're cooking for themselves and they're cooking kosher, you're still going to have to kasher the utensils.
What?
What's the oh, I'm just talking about the oven. We don't have any utensils in the oven. They just eat with plastic.
Yeah, but then you're going to have to turn on the oven to kasher it.
Wait,
Oh.
wait,
At what
wait,
point?
I need to ask.
Let
Hold
me,
on, hold on.
before
Hold on.
everybody gets nervous.
No, this is not right. Hold on.
The din is, 1 second. The din is that only applies to cooking from scratch, meaning the cooking process is done by A to Z by the non-Jew. If a Jew cooks food, okay, and you have a housekeeper, and the housekeeper warms up the food, there is no problem with it because you cooked it. So the whole cooking process from A to Z was not done by the non-Jew. That's why those of you that remember when the airplanes had meals, the TV dinners, we say Olav Hasholem, because they don't exist now, only on international flights. But how did they heat it up on the plane? The answer is the Jewish company cooked it, and all the guy did was heated it up. And therefore, because a Jew turned on the fires when they cooked it, so then it's Bishul Yisroel, and then all the guy is doing is reheating it. So reheating is not a problem. But if a guy cooks, certainly, I will take questions in a minute. If a guy cooks from A to Z food, which cannot be eaten raw and is fit for a table of a king, and we'll explain what that means in a minute, you're not allowed to eat the food unless if a Jew stirred it, a Jew made the fire higher or lower, a Jew did something in the process. But if you come home, and this happens many, many times, by the way, you come home and your non-Jewish housekeeper did you a favor and she cooked dinner for you. And she cooked meat or fish, or she baked it, whatever, it doesn't matter. You're not allowed to eat it because a guy did the process from A to Z. Years ago, when apartheid still existed in South Africa, and every Jewish home had a bunch of slaves, and they were Ashkenazic people, what they used to do, I know this factually, they used to come in, the Balabusta would wake up Friday morning, go into the kitchen, turn on all the fires and the oven, and then they left for the day. They came back hours later, the housekeepers, plural, made the entire Shabbos. They baked challah, and they made the fish, and the cholent, and the kugel, and the meat, and everything was done because the Jew turned on the fire. Now, if a person would be Sephardic, that's a different story. Okay? So the din of Bishul Akum, and I need to explain it a little bit before then I'll take questions. Okay? It has to be something fit for the table of a king. What does that mean in practical language for us? The answer is very simple. Something which is served at a banquet, a wedding, a dinner, a bar mitzvah, something that is a prominent food that is served at a prominent dinner, that is called something which is fit for the table of a king. So therefore, to give you an example, and this is a debatable issue, I'm just giving out general guidelines. Potatoes today are served at banquets. You go to a banquet, even an elegant dinner, you can get the potatoes, whether they're baked, they're fried, whatever it is, you're going to get potatoes. Potatoes are considered they're fit for the king's table. They're fit for the banquet. You do not eat potatoes raw. So therefore, if somebody cooks, a non-Jew cooks potatoes or fries potatoes or makes French fries from A to Z in the baking cooking process, you're not allowed to eat those French fries because it's Bishul Akum. Now, there's an issue, and right after I finish this, I'm going to take questions. So now the shaila is, let's say something like potato chips. Okay? Potato chips are potatoes which are fried. But now the Shaila halacha is like this. When a guy makes potato chips, and I'll give you an example. You go to the store and buy OU potato chips, Lay's, Wise, whatever, any OU company. They're 100% kosher. The question is, does Bishul Akum apply to potato chips? What's the question in halacha? The question is like this. Potato chips are not served at a banquet. Potato chips are a snack. It's not eaten to, as something was called lafis, but it's supposed to accompany bread to fill you up. Potato chips are a snack. It's not, you don't serve it at a banquet. But the question is, by potato chips, do you look at the fact that it's a potato, or do you look at the finished product, the potato chips? If you look at the fact that it's a potato, then the din is you're not allowed to eat potato chips that are not Bishul Yisroel. Or do you say no? It's made l'chatchila, it's fried to be potato chips, and potato chips are not Eilo Shulchan Malachim, and therefore halachically you'd be allowed to eat it. And most opinions, by the way, say halachically potato chips don't need to be Bishul Yisroel. You can buy OU potato chips and it's fine. Why? Because potato chips are not fit for the table, the king's table. There are people that are machmir. They'll only eat, potato chips that have a Yiddish hechsher, which a Jewish company that where the Jews turned on the fight. Okay, now I'll take questions. Yes.
Rabbi Shusterman, like you're saying, the egg can't be eaten raw, but in the cruise, the guy makes you eggs, scrambled eggs, pancake egg, whatever, and he's making it and he's putting all the vegetables. I can't eat it.
But you didn't hear what I said.
Oh, sorry.
Who turned on the fire?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. The mashgiach turns on the fire.
But if he cooked it and he scrambled it, I could eat it.
I said to you, if the mashgiach turns on the fire, it doesn't matter the rest what the guy does, unless if you're Sephardic. And the Ashkenazic world is all lenient, that as long as a Jew, therefore, you go to these catered affairs, right?
Right.
Whatever, and they're making fried eggs and they're making pancakes.
Yes.
Okay. So if it's a kosher caterer, the mashgiach and the goyim know they're not allowed to turn on any fires.
Okay, thank you.
So what happens on the cruises and in the Shabbatons and all that?
Yes.
The Jews turn on the. What do you think happens in the restaurants?
That's
What do you think happens in the restaurants? The problem is sometimes the fire goes off and the goyim just turn it back on. That could be an issue. That's a separate issue. But if it's a proper hashgacha, what happens is the Jew turns on the fire and then the guy makes it, doesn't matter. And that's where you're allowed to eat all those things because the Jew turned on the fire. Okay, anybody else has a question now?
Rabbi, does that mean that any time in the process, if the Jew doesn't turn on the fire in the beginning, any time in the process of the cooking he does something,
then it's fine. Yeah, but the problem is sometimes by the Jew wakes up to do something, it's completely cooked already. Then it's too late. In fact, in Shulchan Aruch, there's a din, but I'm telling you right now, it doesn't apply today, and you'll understand why. It says in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, but it's from the big Shulchan Aruch, that if a housekeeper cooks food in a Jewish home, it's okay. Why? It says, because it's inevitable that the Jewish woman in the kitchen stirred it. But that's when the Jewish women were in the kitchen. Jewish women are not in the kitchen. The housekeepers are in the kitchen. So yeah, if a non-Jewish woman is cooking, even if they turn on the fires, but let's say they're making a soup and the Jewish balabasta comes and stirs the soup or does something in the process, then it's fine. But in today's the women go to work or they're out and the housekeepers are cooking the whole time. It's a problem. And therefore that's an issue of Bishul Akum. But there's another leniency, which is a very important leniency. Most people rely on it. And the kashrus agencies definitely rely on it. And that is, the Darkei Tshuva writes that because the whole concept of Bishul Akum is unique, is like a chiddush, So they write, the Darkei Tshuva brings down a lot of opinions, and this is more or less the accepted opinion today, that if something is not cooked, it's steamed. It's steamed. And I'll explain in a second what that is. The din of Bishul Akum doesn't apply. For instance, I can't say all. Most canned vegetables, I'm talking about peas and corn and peas, beans, most of those are steamed, they're not cooked. Therefore, let's say you buy a can of baked beans. The fact is it's not cooked, it's steamed in the can. So over there, the Darkei Tshuva is mekel. And that's the, except even in the Chassidic world, that they're lenient that things which were steamed, it's not considered cooking because it's not in the category of cooking. And the Chacham, when they say cooking and baking and frying, they mean only cooking, baking, and frying, but not steaming. And that's the hechsher most people use on all the canned goods, that they rely on an OU, okay, or whatever the hechsher is, without having, extra special hechsher. There are people that are machmir. I'm saying halachically, it's not an issue with bishul akum because it's actually steamed. It's not cooked or fried by a non-Jew. Okay, but you have to be very careful, again, because if you go into a place where a non-Jew is making the food from the cooking process from A to Z, then you're not allowed to eat the food, unless if a Jew did something in the process. But I'm going to talk about cereals next time, because cereals is also an interesting question. I'll just mention it because just to keep you thinking for a week. Now you buy the cereals, you buy Rice Krispies, and you buy Cheerios, and you buy all the Kellogg's and the Posts and the General Mills, and I'm not advertising any companies here. They all have a hechsher, but now the question is it bishul akum on those things? Cereal is a bishul akum. By the way, I just want to tell you something. If you have instant oatmeal, okay, about the cereals, I'm going to talk next week. But you have these packages of instant oatmeal. Okay, you open up the package and then you put hot water into it and you stir it and you eat it. Yeah? So when you put the hot water into it, it's fine because you're doing the cooking. You're part of the cooking process. But if you have a housekeeper that's going to take a pack of oatmeal or things like that, and they're going to pour the water into it to feed it to your kid, that's a problem of bishul akum, because no Jew did anything in the cooking process. So that would be an issue. You want to ask a question? Okay, no. Okay, we're going to stop here, and Mitzvah next week we'll continue. But again, don't forget, number one, the shir next week is at 8:30, not 8:15. And once again, I want to mention the class tonight is sponsored by my wife and I in memory of my father-in-law's yahrzeit, which is tonight.
Rabbi, could I just ask you one thing?
Yeah.
If the hot water for the oatmeal comes from an urn, it's already hot, then does it make a difference?
If the Jew made the water, yeah. But if the water cooled down completely already and the non-Jew reheated it, or the non-Jew just puts up a kettle of hot water, then you have an issue.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay,